All right, guys, we are live. Welcome to the weekly chat. Looks like Brandon is just joining us here. Hey, Brandon, how's it going today?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I just literally walked in the door when ran to my laptop. Had to drive down to grab some supplies from our location to re-up on a bunch of amendments for this next cycle. Grab some cuts. I got some cuts of Rick James. I'm pretty excited to run this next cycle, and then. Yeah, mixing up some soils to just do some more testing. So, yeah, never ending, series of testing, but, yeah, let's talk about, I know we were just talking off air. You wanna talk a little bit about what you've been learning about recently? I thought that was really interesting, and I thought listeners might find that interesting too.
Yeah, so we were talking about we've talked about dilution effect on here before. There's an actual name for it, Steenberg effect, and what it describes is if you have a plant that's like severely deficient and you give it a good dose of fertility, the plant's going to grow so rapidly that although the fertility increases, um, the actual fertility in the minerals in the plant decreases. So the EC inside the plant would go down, or the total mineral content would be deficient compared to what it was being. And it's just because the plant's growing so rapidly. And so the reason that's so interesting.
So so 1 second, let's back up. So when we usually talk about the dilution effect, what we're talking about is every plant has a certain genetic potential, and once we've maximized that potential, like the plant has the ability to only produce so many trichomes, let's say. So if I grow a small, like a let's just a regular plant indoors, and I grow that same exact cultivar outdoors with a longer veg, the plant's 10 feet tall, my THC percentages on that outdoor large plant are probably going to be slightly lower because the plant only has this capability to produce so much THC, secondary metabolites, terpenes, genetically in that plant. So it's the dilution of that, we'll just stay with THC, across that entire biomass. So bigger plant, higher yield, possibly slightly lower cannabinoid levels in the tissue is
And
how
I've
I think of the dilution effect.
and that's how most people think of it. I've always been really skeptical of that, having grown some really big plants that would still knock your socks off. I kind of think I understand what you're saying there, but I think of, like, like an indeterminate tomato plant. It just keeps putting out tomatoes. And so there is a limit to where it'll stop, but maybe the limit's so big with a cannabis plant that it's fairly inconsequential, just because
Hmm.
otherwise we'd all be growing little tiny super, you know high cannabinoid plants. I think that and there's a lot of us that grow really big plants. And so I think with a cannabis plant, with respect to the secondary metabolites, that cannabis is it is grown for its secondary metabolites. We're not, like Steenberg effect would mean a lot to me if I was, a soybean farmer or tomato farmer, because we're trying to, especially if I'm growing it for myself, because we want the most useful caloric intake that we can get. If you look at your health, I think it's Steve Solomon that does that. Your health is your, um, what is it? Your total calories divided by your useful calories or something. But we
I don't know
want
that one.
you want to take in, you want to get the most bang for your buck. You want the most mineral content for the calories that you're intaking. And so
Hmm.
if I'm growing vegetables, I want a plant that has got the maximum amount of mineral nutrition in it. And so Steenberg effect would let me know that harvesting plants that are deficient, or right after recovering from deficiency, I'm going to end up with a much lower mineral content. And therefore, with lower mineral content, it's not a direct relationship, but it does have a secondary impact on secondary metabolites. And so if you have a plant that grows really rapidly, If you've got a plant that, so this kind of points to things that we already kind of coach people to do or not do. Like you don't want to apply a bunch of nitrogen at the end of a round, so that delays finish. Part of that is probably tied directly to the Steenberg effect. It also diminishes terpenes, probably also tied to the Steenberg effect. So,
So can I ask you a question? So
sure.
the way I understood reading about the Steenberg effect as you sent me the information on it is if I have a let's say I have a plant and it's visibly deficient, like it's lacking phosphorus, let's just say, and I give that plant a bunch of phosphorus in an available form. Um, that plant will then uptake into the tissue levels of phosphorus that are luxury, more than the plant needs, possibly to the detriment of secondary metabolite production. So the plant's going to go, I don't have any phosphorus, starving of phosphorus, my limiting factor growth. Now I have too much phosphorus. I'm going to take up way more than I need initially, which is going to limit uptake of other minerals, and I'll see better growth and yield, but I may see a reduction in secondary metabolites, terpenes, those sorts of things in that plant. And so the applicable way I understood is like if I have a plant deficiency, some level of stress, hidden hunger as we call it, and then I correct for that, I may see visual growth, happier looking plants, but I may see lower secondary metabolite levels, um, cannabinoids, terpenes, things like that, than I would have had that plant not experience that stress, that nutrient stress. Is that correct?
I think that all sounds pretty solid. Luxury, when I think of luxury levels, that's, here's sufficiency. Anything below here will, produce a change in the crop to the betterment. And then above this is luxury up until you hit an excess. And
Okay, so at excessive levels, I
yeah,
guess,
so
then maybe
just
luxury is
excess.
not the
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So just
Okay.
so what'll happen is your plant gets, and I don't think it's so much that it's kind of the opposite of that actually, because what you're saying is it's going to pull in so much phosphorus, but what's happening is the plant's deficient. You apply the needed fertility, and so you get a rapid growth response, and the growth response increases the volume of the plant so much that, in the same way, think about like if we add a bunch of water, I've got a 50-gallon jug, and I've got an EC. I've only got this much water in it, and I've got an EC of 7. I add a bunch of water, and the EC is going down, down, down. So it's actually diluting the mineral content because the plant's growing so quickly. So it's diluting the mineral content percentage wise compared to what it should be. And so the plant can rebound, but then, because it's growing so fast and it dilutes that mineral content, the big takeaway for me was that we don't get predictive growth. We've added this whatever, and then we're not getting, for us, as cannabis growers, we're not getting the secondary metabolites, the terpenes, the, cannabinoids, things that we want. And so it's just a great, interesting conversation for crop steering. And,
So what sparked this was we had a grower, a facility that had a particular cut that they were getting good, they're real happy with, and then more recently they were noticing that the plant the final bud just did not have the same level of terpenes, maybe slightly lower THC. I can't remember, but it just wasn't hitting the way it was before. And so we were trying to find what the possible causes were. And this is one of those possible cause. This isn't to say this is what was going on. We're still figuring that out. But you want to share the other thing you sent me a text on today in regards to this particular,
well,
mystery.
yeah, it's interesting because just like our friend up in New England who did the macro photography and was able to count clear, milky, and amber trichomes. and then found that the cannabinoid levels were all over the place compared to what we typically think is the proper time to harvest.
Mhm.
And so that was really talk about pulling the rug out from this old dog. 40 years of growing, and we're not supposed to pull by trichome. Like, okay. And then the other question, obviously, was to our friend was, well, what do we go by? And he said, I don't know, which is fair, because that's my answer. I don't know. And so, you really have to learn your individual cultivar. It's going to take a bunch of different runs because you're going to have to change different things slowly over time. I just recently heard a really interesting conversation with Francis Not So Dog, and Gabby, famous for the Gabby Staten Island cut of the sour diesel. And Not So was saying that he was coaching a friend of his who was growing the cut because, and they were all in agreement that THC should not be a metric that we're hanging our cannabis on. But because that's what the market asks for, he was coaching this guy to pull his sour cut earlier because he was actually seeing higher THC numbers cutting it at week 8, I think. Don't quote me on the weeks, where most folks know that you want to let a sour go 11, 12 weeks for the most, the terpiest cannabis. And so it just goes to show that, like, we don't know, like, all these things that we operate by, and so it really does, leave room for the art in this science to learn your cultivar. And I'm never going to pull a sour at week 8, unless there's a horrible storm or something takes out the power, or I don't know. I'd maybe hash it, but, like, I'm always going to let that go 11, 12 weeks because I want those terps. So it's just really interesting. There's all these
I
things.
think the big takeaway there is harvest timing should be based off of genetics, and understanding your genetics really well too, I think, is important. And our good buddy Chad uh, threw out a comment, so I just wanted to highlight that. Since Chad is in here and we were talking the other day, I just want to mention we do still have the Westport blend. We just mixed up a fresh batch, I believe, and we're going to be bagging that soon if folks wanted to try it. It's been great working with Chad. If you want to see his plants in our soil, go head over to his YouTube channel. I'm guessing most of you came from there because he's got a great following. But if you haven't seen it, he shows his whole water only run on there. It's a great grow journal for folks to check out. So, um, yeah, I love that. I'm always learning about this plants, and I think it's really fun. That's the whole reason I do this.
You can never master it. You can never master this stuff, man.
You
It's
can never have too much soil, according to
yeah.
Chad Westport. All right, let's dive into the questions. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for listening to our little conversation at the beginning. So Jeff kicks it off. Please, would you remind how you use CO2 and why, along with more detail about how to control environments while cold CO2 is in use slash on? Brandon, do you want to answer that?
I'll try. I think I know what they're asking. So I run gas, so there's no point in running gas if you're not running par above 8, 900, like that's number one. Two,
And well, hold on. And there's no reason to run lights above 1,000 ppfd if you're not adding CO2 as well. So
yeah,
both of those things go together.
yeah, perfect. And then ambient, we always joke and say it's 420 because it's easy to remember, but it's usually around 450 to 500, and then I like to supplement. I like to run a room that has CO2 at around 1200, par around 1000, and I run the temperature of the room at like 81, 82. That's through the end of stretch, because I'm trying to push these plants. I want big, healthy plants, and then I start backing off on temperature, and along with that, I'll back off of the gas a little bit. But the last 3 weeks, I cut the gas off completely because, we know from shipping food, if you want something to not finish, if you want to delay senescence, if you want to send tomatoes from Florida to Washington, put them in a truck, seal it up, and pump it full of CO2, and they'll still be, green when they get here. The opposite is ethylene. If you need fruit and vegetables that's why you put the tomato in a paper bag, because as it off gases the ethylene gas that speeds up ripening. So, you know,
Yeah, I haven't seen any definitive research related to CO2 in cannabis in this, but so a lot of what we're sharing is just to be fully transparent, is a little bit anecdotal based on the number of people we've talked to and the facilities we've worked with and what we've seen. So this information we're sharing now, I would say, is more experiential versus some of the stuff where we may actually be able to lean on research that's been done and replicated that we can share. But the way I approach CO2 is like every other variable, like light, temperature, humidity, moisture, genetics, fertility. All of these things are variables, and it's all a matter of figuring out what your limiting factor of growth is, because there's always one. There's always something limiting the genetic potential of the plant up until its genetic potential of the plant limiting your growth. So if you keep that mentality and look at CO2 as just another limiting factor. So why add CO2? Well, it allows me to run higher par levels. Why run higher par levels? Well, that allows me to push the plant harder, get more photosynthesis, allow it to grow faster, yield more in a shorter period of time. So CO2 only makes sense if you're running, a mostly sealed room. If you're running a tent in a basement or in your house, and you have a fan running that air through the tent, it doesn't really, you're just wasting money. So, and you're probably able to maintain, that 420 ppm of CO2 ambient if you're pushing air through the tent pretty rapidly. So that's another way of approaching it. In which case, run your ppfd around 800, maybe 900, and you should be able to have a good run that way too. So that's, yeah, I think you covered it. I ran my CO2 at 1,000 ppm my last cycle. I might bump it up to 1,200 this cycle. Um, you can choose to use it in veg if you want to speed up veg, but if you're not trying to speed up veg, then you don't necessarily need to add it at that point in time. Like if I had a bunch of plants that were really healthy and ready to go, um, or I had more plants that I could plant rather than having to grow a few larger plants, I wouldn't necessarily add CO2 in veg if I because you don't need to. It's a waste of money if that makes sense. All right, what do you want to
yeah,
add to that, and then we'll move on.
yeah. So, I will sometimes run CO2 in veg just because I want to, if I don't have enough plants to fill my space and I want to really put on biomass. But the thing I wanted to add is, folks that are new to organics usually don't realize that there's a very significant amount of CO2 off gassing that happens from your living beds, from the biology and arthropods and everything in your beds. And so, that can create what we call night growth, where you get like these big, beautiful buds that look like they should be finished, and then they get these fresh flushes of brand new pistils, and it can delay finish and all these. You can get weird foxtailing, and it's just from having CO2 that off gases when your lights go out, and so the plant's not
Plants
taking.
naturally do that anyway, but we get more CO2 from all the soil respiration that's occurring.
Yeah, and so it can get really high. We've seen like 3,800 at night. And so that's something that, if you're turning your CO2 off the last 3 weeks, you want to be cognizant that, put a sniffer in that room, hook it up to a squirrel cage fan or something, and get that extra CO2 out of there at night.
All right, Garage Grower asks, what do you guys do for drying and curing temperatures and humidity? I will let you take this one because that's not something I'm great at.
Right
I'll
on.
be honest.
So there's two very important words here: drying and curing, two different processes, and I like to look at it that way. The first thing you want to do is dry down your material as fast as you can so that you get it below a certain water activity metric, so that you technically should not be able to grow molds. fungus. And so that's what we're trying to do. So it's a race to do that. Um, and, there's old school ways of bending it. And I feel pretty comfortable. I can bend a plant and know whether I need to move it into the curing phase or not.
Yeah.
But you can use water activity meters. Um, there's different ways to measure that really accurately rather than having to gain the experience to be able to do it by touch. But so you're trying to get that dry. I like to hang whole plants or as much of a whole plant as I can. I pull the big sun leaves off, but I leave all the sugar leaves on. One, it protects the bud, and it's just another little moisture source for your plant. So I'll try to, I'll hang those. I'll put those in a room with a, pretty heavy duty fan pointing the opposite direction. I just want a lot of air movement, not necessarily blowing across the plant. I'm not trying to dehydrate the plant with the fan. And then I'd like to set that room 60 degrees. I've done it in colder. I've done it in 50. Um,
Hmm.
but I'm just really, it doesn't really seem to matter. I can get that drying phase done, usually within 5 days, 7 days at the because I've lived in some pretty humid places too, so that's part of it. Your region will be different from mine, or um, if I'm trying to cure in a tent outside, um, in winter, it's easy. If I'm trying, so it's going to be different for everybody. But I'm really just trying to get it. So the 60
You
60.
don't want to cure in your room either where you're
No.
growing
Yeah.
because you have fungal spores in there. They could potentially grow. Some things grow on necrotic tissue. Botrytis happens to be one of them. We want to make sure we're not putting them back into a room that may have a higher spore count than, say, a clean tent or other area to dry and cure.
Yeah. Never trim or cure in your room. But on average, a room that's 60 degrees and at least 50 percent or lower relative humidity seems to work really well for me. I can,
For the drying part.
yeah, for the drying part. And so usually within 5 to 7 days, based off of a bend test, I buck everything. And again, I leave all the sugar leaves on and I just buck all the buds. And this is interesting because people give me shit about this all the time. And I was interested to hear because in that same interview with Not So Dog and Gabby was making fun of Not So for he bucks into paper bags. And I do the same thing. I don't go into turkey bags. I don't go into tubs, 5 gallon buckets. I go into either a cardboard box, usually later. But the first thing I go into is just your standard paper grocery bag. And, I only fill it about that much. And I just roll the tops up. And then I'll put those in, and then the curing starts. The curing's more of a low and slow. I like to do it in a room with like 60% relative humidity. I want that room to be 65 degrees, maybe 60. Um, and that's just a process of opening those bags. But the reason I like the paper bags is because they continue to breathe. They're permeable. There's not the gas barrier that plastic has. And so that means I can still, it's not like I have to go in there and burp it for a certain amount of time. It's just constantly burping itself, but at a reduced rate because it is in this paper bag. But so that's something that I started doing when I moved from Ohio to South Carolina. Ohio is relatively dry compared to South Carolina. And so I was getting mold on crops. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And so I just went to paper bags and that solved the problem. I've just stuck to it. And then later I'll go into a cardboard box. Um, and then eventually they'll go into turkey bags. And that's just all based off of touch.
Right on. Cool. I just want to let you guys know too. I only have two cats. If there's no third cat, or I'm not a crazy cat lady. It may look that way so far in this video. No one's been home all day, so they're a little starved for attention. But yes, only two cats.
I
All
got
right, let's see here. Let me find out the next question. Silo Stylosin asks, when you guys give a amendment recommendation, so like fertilizer, can you use the amendments that I have on hand preferentially? Yes, absolutely. So if you wanted to do a soil analysis through us and then get a recommendation, we just have to know what you have on hand in terms of the NPK values, and we can use those to balance your soil too. Otherwise, we're going to use what we call our pantry list, which are things that are low in heavy metals. They're very clean. And typically not bringing in other things that we don't necessarily want, sodium chlorides, uh, stuff like that. All right, this one's for you. Noah asks, Brandon, was wondering how your battle with thrips is going. How long do you think it takes to keep them quarantined and completely gone?
So Noah and I were having a conversation earlier via email. He's got thrips, and I always struggle if I'm looking at something on my phone, just because I have crappy old man eyes, and tattooing is probably part of that. But I like to see something on a computer. But the first thing I noticed on the picture was the damage, and so just I know this isn't the question, but I'll get to the question in a second. But I think it's a good opportunity to remind folks that if you're properly scouting, and by properly, I mean every day, and the entire canopy, and not just the canopy, but the entire plant, top, middle, bottom, looking at your soil, scratch your soil, see what critters come up. Are they Swirsky? Are they rove beetles? Is it good stuff? Is it springtails that tell you maybe your soil's a little too wet? Is it, so like it's important to look at this stuff on a regular basis. Most of the time, you're going to see, if you're doing that correctly, you're going to see the damage way before you see the adult instar of whatever your target pest is, your ID pest. And so the first thing I noticed on this picture, there was one little tiny adult thrip on a leaf that was kind of up close, but I saw a big leaf behind it that had that very telltale damage that you see from thrips. Thrips, what is it? They're rasping jaws, but they are scraping the top of the cuticle off, and so if you turn the leaf, you'll get this kind of silver or shiny reflection back at you, and it looks like these little irregular. It looks like somebody put solder on the leaf surface, and so it's really easy to ID that you've got thrips. And if you attack it before you start seeing the adults, then you're way ahead of the game. So, spider mites has the speckling, if it's webs, it's, it's not too late, but it's too late. And, thrips, you want to be looking for that silvery damage. So those are dead giveaways. If you've got chewing like big sections, that you've got caterpillars, and caterpillars, like if this is a branch and this is a stem coming off, caterpillars will line themselves up perfectly straight right here. And so a lot of times you'll see the damage right here, you'll see the poop here, and you don't see the insect, but they're hiding and they've lined themselves up perfectly with that petiole stem. So that makes it easy to find them. And so you should be looking for damage. So my battle with thrips, I'm battling two things. I'm battling some PM in my room, and I'm battling thrips in my veg room. And that happens when you take a month off from your garden because you're sick. And so I've got some problems. And so I did a big cull of plants. I got rid of a bunch of plants, things that I had doubles and triples of. And I did a really intense defoliation. And then because it's thrips, I am using spinosad. I like oils. I like Epishield. I like Suff oil. Spinosad as far as an initial knockdown. And you always want to rotate your products because you want to rotate your MOAs. You don't want modes of action. You don't want your pests to become resistant to whatever you're using, because then you've lost one of your tools. So I like to rotate things. And so I did 2 applications or 3 applications of spinosad. And so I, very fine mist nozzle, I just pour it into a pump sprayer because I hate doing this, and I very fine mist. I make sure that because it's spinosad, I'm doing it during the cool part of the day, and I turn the fans on to get it dry as soon as I'm done. I think it's got a 4-hour REI. So it's kind of a pain in the butt to do in the house because I just can't go back in there for a long time. Um, Try to hit the bottoms of the leaves where the thrips hide, try to get the tops of the leaves where they feed. And that's very effective with spinosad. You can hit thrips with oils for months and they just kind of hang out at this low threshold. The spinosad really seems to knock them out. And then the other part that folks neglect is the Bovaria drenches. So do a weekly Bovaria drench because thrips pupate in the soil, and that
Some
will
thrips
some,
species
yeah,
pupate in the soil,
yeah, some do, yeah. So yeah, so
not
that's
all.
that's that's kind of like how I deal with it. And then I'm getting ready to switch over to EpiShield because I don't want to stay with the same foliar all the time. I feel like that's setting yourself up for trouble.
Uh, all right, couple of things to add to there. Fun, maybe not to everyone, but I think it's fun. Nomenclature facts. Thrips is always plural, so you would never say thrip. It's always thrips. Suzanne would call you on that if you ever reach out to her. Make sure thrips is plural. Also, on the nomenclature side, I see this one wrong all the time. On in terms of mycorrhizae, mycorrhizae is the relationship between the plant and the fungus when the infection has occurred. Mycorrhizal fungi is the fungus that causes that infection. So it's a small difference, but for if you want to sound really smart on a topic, you got to use the right terminology. So
And on that
just want to
same on that topic, I've been corrected and told that it's not spinosad, that it's spinosad. But then I've asked a bunch of people, and they're like, "Oh no, it's spinosad." So I don't know, but spelled like it sounds.
Yeah, and the other things I want to add about thrips are one of your pests, it probably has the least economic damage. So yeah, if you have thrips, it sucks, it's annoying, it'll drive you crazy, but you'll probably still get a good yield and harvest. In fact, one could argue that maybe it's going to cause these particular stress triggers that may actually lead to slightly higher secondary metabolite production. Don't know. They could vector other diseases, so keep that in mind. But as far as pests go, they're probably one of the easier ones to manage in terms of what you're going to get for a yield and in your crop finishing versus, two spotted spider mites, for example. Now you've got webbing and other issues. Um, in terms of beneficials, so for example, I got some plants. I'm going to tattle on you, Brandon. I got some plants from you a year or two ago when I was setting up my grow at my house here, and he called me. He called me super upset, like I thought someone had died. But what had happened was Brandon gave me some plants, and then he discovered thrips on the mother plant or on his clones that he'd taken off the same plant. And so he gave me thrips. And so I ordered some SF nematodes. I ordered what was the other one? Simitus?
Probably Semitis, maybe Aureus.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look it up. But we can help you if you need beneficials for um, any any pest. We'll dial them in based off of your situation, your environmentals, what's going on in your room, what stage of growth you are. So that really needs to be tailored to an individual's scenario and the ID of the pest you're dealing with. But basically, where I was getting at in terms of when are you really through this? So that cycle, I had a little bit of thrips damage. My next cycle in, I started the cycle the same way. Oh, and I did 2 sprays of Sufoil X foliars, when the plants were still little at the beginning of the cycle, and they were 3 days apart. And then I didn't do anything else that cycle. Plants finished fine. The leaves had a little bit of damage on the leaves. That second cycle I didn't find any thrips damage. And then I think I've done 3 cycles now in that room, about to start my fourth. That third cycle, man, I had yellow sticky cards up for weeks and I couldn't find a bug on them. It was amazing. I had isopod, roly poly. issues in the beds, but there was nothing flying around and nothing on the leaves themselves. So this next cycle, I'm about to start. Um, I want to get to some more questions, but I'm happy to talk a little bit about how I'm going to approach that for this next cycle too. So yeah. All right, moving on though. We're getting too chatty. I recently acquired a few spent mushroom bricks from a local gourmet mushroom grower. I would like to make soil with them. What would my first steps be, and can I top dress the mix? Can I top dress or mix with recycled soil? Um, all right, I'm gonna give a few thoughts here really quick. So, spent mushroom bricks, I'd want to make sure they didn't use any chemicals I didn't want. I'd want to make sure that that material wasn't super high in sodium or chlorides or anything else that might be negatively impact my plant's health. People hear mushroom bricks and they think, oh, fungus, that's going to be super beneficial. It's going to vary. Um, Quite a bit actually too. I've seen some really bad mushroom substrates and I've seen some other ones that were look pretty good. But in general, I would just say be careful. You really have to understand the growing system that they're coming out of to determine how quality that material actually is. Um, I've always seen it look a lot like peat, so I would probably substitute a portion of my peat fraction in my mix, and that should maintain approximately the same physical properties of soil, but it may change the overall pH of the soil. So I would want to mix it, test my pH, and then add calcium and nutrients accordingly to get up to an EC and a pH range that looks good. But before I ever mixed it in, I'd want to have a better idea of how that those mushrooms were grown before I even decide if I was going to use it or not.
Yeah, I
Anything you want to add?
just reiterate that most of the mushroom composts that I've seen are really high, like surprisingly high in sodium. And so that's the first thing I think of when I think of mushroom bricks. But,
Cool.
be easy to test and then you'd know.
All right. So Jeff asks, is there I think he's saying finite because he corrected it later in his next comment. Is there a finite number of trichomes per plant? Does the trichome density actually change anytime a plant gets larger? Any research on phytodilution? Um, I can't speak directly to this. I haven't looked into it deeply enough. There is quite a bit of research around trichomes. What I've seen on the research side is that there's no correlation between trichome density and THC percentage or quality. This is the purple punch scenario that people are familiar with. This idea that a plant can look really frosty, and that's really great for bag appeal, but it doesn't speak to the to what's actually going on in the plant, the quality of that flower, any of that. So yeah, don't judge a plant based solely on trichome density, the frostiness, visual appearance um, of that plant. Anything you want to add to that, Brandon?
No, I don't think that, trichome density um, never seems to follow any kind of relationship with the size of the plant as far as I've ever been able to tell. I've never seen any data associated with that. I think it has more to do with the, obviously genetics and then stress.
All right, just working my way down. Medically minded. I'm so glad to hear that our soil analysis has been helpful. We love to hear that. Um, People are talking
And if
about
and if
nuts.
and
So,
this is a conversation Tad and I were having earlier today. Um, if we're working with you on your soil, we're trying to provide guardrails based on averages of what most growers are doing. If you see anything with your plants that you don't love, call us. Call us yesterday. Don't call us tomorrow. Plants grow by the inch, die by the yard, especially in organics. We've got to move really fast. It's better to be proactive than reactive, especially in organics. And so, if you don't look good, we don't look good. We like to look good. So reach out to us. If you've got an issue with your plants, and especially if we're doing analysis, we want to know, and that's going to help us help other growers, as we're constantly adjusting our targets based on the averages of what we get back from growers. So
yeah, just to reiterate that, like I had a guy using our small nutrient pack. That's a $20 with free shipping product. It's a very small amount of nutrient pack, a grower who didn't get the results they want. They mixed it with, I'm doing this from memory, ocean forest, and they said they had too much nitrogen, and now they need to know if they needed to flush because our nutrient pack says no need to flush. And so this guy probably has two plants. I called him personally from my cell phone yesterday and left him a voicemail. I hope he calls back because I want to figure out what was going on there so that we can give him better advice moving forward on how he reamends his soil. So yeah, reach out. We want to help. That's what we're here for. And we don't just help large facilities. We really do try to help everyone. I can't spend 2 hours on the phone necessarily with a guy with 4 plants in a tent, but I will absolutely reply and give you a response no matter how many plants you have.
Yep.
Um, all right, dark water herbs. Outdoor plants and pots. They have stopped wanting water, have looked the same, healthy for 2 weeks, but lots of white pistils. Trikes are mixed, clear, milky. Are they done for the year? And to give a little more context, as I scroll down, these are no jokes, and they are in your neck of the woods. I think you know dark water. So, any thoughts on that, Brandon?
Yeah, so we live pretty close to each other. Usually plants, after, stretch, plants are just drinking like crazy, and then it just kind of peters off. And then we've had some, cooler temperatures. We've been really lucky it hasn't rained. Or, well, I care more about the planet than a couple of plants outside. So it would be nice if we got some rain. But for the plants, for the cannabis plants, it's been very nice that we haven't had any rain. But so it has been really humid. I think our relative humidity this morning was at 82. I think it was 83 yesterday afternoon. So I'm always checking that. And so when you've got air that's got that much moisture in it, it slows transpiration down, way down, because there's just not much room. If you think of a plant like a straw and it's pumping moisture into this bag, there's only so much room for moisture. And so once that bag gets full of, it's evapotranspiration is going to slow way down. So I would expect them to not be drinking much. I've got some outdoor plants as well that are heavy drinkers, once, twice a day, just a month ago. Now I'm only watering them once every other day, and they're in small pots. So I would expect that all makes sense. I think we've got rain coming on, let me look real quick, next week, but I would maybe pull them right before the rain comes. Yeah, it looks like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We've got a good chance of having rain. And so if it does look like it's going to rain, I'd go ahead and chop them. But otherwise, I would let them go. Mine, I think, are in week 7. Um, so yours are probably very similar. I was talking to Dr. Ben. He's got some that are outdoors, and they look like they're in week 1. They just kicked off. So everybody's got their little microclimates, and he might be in a spot where he's uh, facing the sun all day, southern exposure, and so he's still getting 13 hours of light or whatever. He might have a specific genetic that is
Genetics play a huge role in that too. Like this idea that all cannabis plants flower at 12/12, I think is something that you have to realize is not factual. Like there's a lot of photoperiod research that's been happening that shows that certain plants are going to yield better, perform better, have higher secondary metabolites, maybe at 13 hours or 11 hours. Um, or there's a trade-off there where you may get more yield but lower secondary metabolite production. So photoperiod plays a huge role in hormonal changes in the plant itself, and all of these varied genetics are going to respond differently. So I just want to bring that up for folks
Allison
because it is
Justice
important to think about.
did a lot of research on that, and then Dr. Bruce Bugby was talking recently about um, photoperiod, and if you've got a plant that we can make flower at 16 hours, he's like, that's going to be a better yielder. And and he's obviously there's the trade-off, quality and quantity. He's like, but most of what drives this industry is THC and quantity. And he's like, so and then especially I think most of Allison's tests was on hemp, and it was specifically for outdoor growers. so that if you were in different latitudes, they could match a cultivar to what you could grow, which again would present a better yield, better return on your investment.
Sorry, I had to write down a question that I had for an upcoming lighting interview. It made me think of something, so I wanted to throw it out there. Yeah, I think we covered that one pretty well. All I would add is as transpiration slows down, you're having less movement of water, and inside of that xylem, you're also having less movement of certain nutrients. I think specifically of calcium. So you may start to see some deficiencies and issues towards the end there. And as you get any sort of like necrosis from this lack of nutrient transport within the plant, you could be opening yourself more to certain pathogens. Specifically, I think of botrytis. So, fortunately, because of where you live, I would just really keep an eye on things and get ready to pull them down pretty quickly. Certainly, if you can avoid any like massive humidity or changes like heavy rains, things like that coming up, you might just have to harvest early and take what you can get. That's the outdoor environment here in Washington State on the West Coast, or on the west side of the mountains. All right. Sean asks, I use a self watering base that wicks up water up with a rope. I don't think the wicking effect reaches the top dress layer and mulch. How often should I water the top layers of the pot? Um, this is going to have a lot of variables, Sean, based off of how much root growth you have, what stage of growth your plants are
How deep?
in, yeah, how deep your pot is. What I would say is you can monitor it, and if you feel like it's drying, it's not getting wet enough in that top layer. One, the plant can probably adjust for that. The roots will push further down into the soil, or you could just do a light, take like a pump sprayer with water and lightly mist the top layer there to gently wet the upper profile of soil. But the plant should be able to reach down for the water once its roots are established and correct for that as well.
And with wicks, the reason
Oh,
wicks are nice with a sip is because your you know water works via gravity and capillary action, and it can move very efficiently up like a nylon wick and into a bed. And so as long as you're bringing your wicks up to the surface, you should have you know much more uniform moisture levels. And shorter and wide is always better than tall and narrow for pots and water.
right on. So Silas asks, does biochar need to be reapplied after a certain number of cycles? In theory, no. We I don't know that we've ever added more biochar in any of the grows we work with on scale. You probably could. I don't think there's a lot of harm to it other than it's going to raise your pH. If it's good biochar, it'll probably be a little bit alkaline. But beyond that, I don't see a lot of risk associated with it, but I don't know that you're going to get a ton of benefit there. Oh, this is okay. Sorry, I'm just catching up. In terms of the no joke with dark water herbs, he said they're just in suspended animation, which we kind of already covered. Chad mentions that it's about 65 days in flower for the no joke, and that we've been having cooler nights, which you guys kind of talk about.
I think I took the no joke to 11, 10 or 11 weeks.
He says his ambient CO2 is 1,000. That's wild, Chad. I wonder what's going on. Maybe you don't have good ventilation in your house, and
Yeah, if
maybe
he,
it's building up a
yeah,
little bit.
if he's got a dog in that room, if he's in there chit chatting all day on podcasts, who knows?
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Holy Toledo says he's in the same boat. He lives in the same room he grows in. So there you go. Um, cool. Sorry, guys. I have to stay on the comment thread, and I can't work my way down, or I lose track of all the questions. So I'm just catching up with you guys. Oh, here's one. Would it be a safe bet to use root shield wettable powder for soil diseases per round as a preventative? Brandon.
Yes. 100%. Trichoderma is, and we just found this out last week, thanks to, oh, I can't give you credit because I can't remember. I'm so sorry. But somebody on last week's live told us about iron chelation from trichoderma. And so I did some research, and it does chelate iron. And so thank you. Tag yourself in here so we could give you a shout out. But that was, I love this. You know, somebody taught us something really important. And so I'm a huge fan of using Root Shield. One of the scariest things for me was just switching when I switched over to organics was I'd been doing sterile rooms forever. I bleached everything between rounds, everything, you know, I started off fresh every round. And so it was terrifying that I had to maintain the health of the soil, and it had critters in it. And it was scary. It took a big leap of faith for me to do that. Root Shield is one of the things that really not only kept me safe when I overwatered or, you know, had beds directly on the ground that got cool, all the things that we do that we learn from. Root Shield kept me out of trouble with all of that. Root Shield does help break down, you know, nitrogen and other organic amendments, but it's just a really aggressive soil bacteria that will outcompete, you know, Fusarium, Pythium, the bad guys that, you know, that are all over my forehead right now. You know,
Oh wait, no, Principle's not. Yeah, no, we're talking Principle's a Bavaria product, right? Or is it Trichoderma? I always get them all confused.
I can't remember. Root Shield's my go-to for trichoderma. I don't use
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that. Principle's the new one from Bioworks, and it has some interesting data behind it. I think it's Bavaria. I'll have to look it up after this. We do carry. We are able to get Root Shield for folks if you want it. We just don't have our website up with it yet, along with all the Bioworks products. So if folks are looking for those things, yeah, we can get you good pricing on it. Organic Tendency says, pro tip, when add CO2 when your plant is transpiring excessively, as in rapid drybacks and wet leaf surfaces. And then Ross says, adequate airflow is utmost importance. Unless you have really dry air blowing across, it's a good way to check is to feel for air circling with your hand. If you don't feel air in that spot, there's another thing called I believe it's anemometer, Aneometer. It essentially measures your airflow, and then there are optimal levels, meters per second. I think it's like 0.8 to 1 is the range from Dr. Greenhouse, but again, I'm doing this off the top of my head. But yeah, you can absolutely measure and manage that.
And if you don't have a meter, just make sure all the leaves are moving just a little tiny bit. If they're not moving, then you have microclimates there. And it is a Bavaria product. I looked it up.
It is okay. Thrips or dicks? Yes. Just working my way down. What type of thrip? Noah says Western flower. I'm only highlighting this. No, I'm not calling you out. Um, According to Suzanne, she has not seen a case of Western flower thrips in cannabis in a long time. Specifically, what she's seeing for the most part is onion thrips. But the way they have to figure this out is they have to slide mount the thrips and look very closely at their junk, apparently. And it's not easy to do. Like you can't just like take a picture of a thrips and get it identified. So um, the reason this matters, that's the question I always ask Suzanne, because she goes super deep on stuff. And I'm like, why do I care, Suzanne? Like, I just want to grow plants. Like, I don't need to know every detail about this particular aphid or how to tell them all apart. But the reason this matters specifically with thrips is some pupate in the soil and some pupate on the leaf. And so knowing which kind you have, like, for example, adding SF nematodes to treat thrips that pupate on the leaf, it's not going to do anything. Now, fortunately, with SF nematodes, there's a ton of other benefits to them with dealing with other pests like um, fungus gnats specifically. So there's good reason to add them anyway, but that's something to keep in mind.
Well, and
Yeah,
I'll
and then
say it seems to be mostly onion and then some chili thrips as well. And then in Noah's case, Noah's the first thrips that I could see with my naked eye in a long time, which does make me think it is Western flower. But like Tad said, until you get the close up Pornhub shot of your thrips, you're not going to know for sure.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to skip over some of the stuff just to keep this moving. So we're getting close on time. Little Nugs asks, can you dip the clones? I like to dip the clones in Dr. Zymes and organic soap in the sink. I leave them soaking for a couple of minutes and do a soil drench with spinosad. So yes, you can do dips with clones. You don't want to dip the soil or the media, but you can dip the phyllosphere, the above ground leaf portion of soils. Now, or of the plant. Don't dip the soil. Now, I choose to use Suffoil X or Epishield just because of the research and data around it and lower risk of phytotoxicity. But yes, you can. The risk with those products that you listed, I think, are slightly higher risk of phyto or plant stress, just based on the concentrations in them that are required to get the effect that you're looking for.
I've done
It's
dips with Epishield, Suffoil, Monterey, sulfur suspended in water. That's a note: never mix sulfurs and oils; you'll get horrible phytotoxicity.
yeah, I don't. So the plants I just got are actually they're not. I mean, they're clones, but they're like pretty big. So like
Handsy.
I rushed in the door. I just took the plants. Actually, I had to walk by a plant that I knew had spider mites on it, so I dodged that and put them right outside in the sunlight in my door. And then as soon as this call is over, I'm gonna go take them and put them into my grow space. Now, ideally, I would treat them prior to going into my grow space, but I don't have a great way of doing that. And I don't want Brandon and I were talking about this actually, and I'm still on the fence here because my vote would be to hit them with Epishield. So maybe I water them, hit them with Epishield, and then take them into the grow space, Brandon. But your thing was don't hit them with Epishield if they're a little bit dried out or at all stressed, because any sort of like foliar oil pesticide could cause further stress to the plant.
Yeah, so when you've got leaves that are already, whether it's perceptible visually or not, but starting to wilt, if if you hit them with oils, you can have some phytotoxicity. So I always make sure that my plants are well watered before I spray them. Um,
Okay.
so with clones, if you're dipping them in oils, Epishield, Suffoil, anything like that, turn them upside down, wrap a rag, or I use a paper towel around the clone, around the root, and then dunk it upside down because you never want to add oil to your root zone because you'll suffocate the roots and kill your plants. So that's really important. The dip should just be above ground. You don't want to get oils. You could you could take an entire clone, roots and all, and dip it in sulfur, but then you can't get oil on it ever again. Well, not ever again.
Mhm.
I'm being dramatic. For 2 months, a month, depends on the environment.
Hmm. Yeah, I can't speak to that. I will say though that because these plants are so large, I'm not going to do a dip. I'm just because I also don't want to mix up dip rate stuff because the dip rates are lower than spray rates, so you do have to adjust that. And the Epishield is like you're using such a tiny amount of it. Like I think I put an eighth of a teaspoon in a spray bottle for that entire spray bottle because I was trying to get a small enough amount. I didn't want to mix up a whole gallon of it because I only needed to hit one plant that had spider mites, and I did that like it was a fern, an indoor fern, and I just moved the fern outside, and I'm just going to kill the fern. I don't want to deal with it because I already had webbing, and I just fuck it. Like it's not worth my time. It's a $20 plant, so I'm going to use that same Epishield I mixed up and probably check the moisture level on these clones that I'm looking at out the window, and then maybe do a light spray foliar, and then take them into the room, put them at match the PPFD they were at from when I got them, and they look pretty healthy, but there's a little bit you can tell they've had a little bit of stress. So I just want to get them healthy, and I certainly will not. I'll probably end up wait till they're healthy, top them, train them, plant them in the beds, and then flip to flower once they're fully healthy and have started to fill out the canopy. And I tend to always, like every other grower I know, wait too long to flip, and then you end up with too much canopy, and then I think I over defoliate, and I never do. It's
Never.
the same thing, and we know better, and yet we keep it's perpetual cycle. So that's kind of where I'm at for right now. But again, I'm just starting out. I just picked up the plants like an hour ago, 2 hours ago, and so that's sort of my thought process. Hopefully, that's helpful for folks. All right, boy, we are out of time. Let's try and fly through these last few questions. Um, Brandon, I think they can last for weeks, up to a month, right? Nematodes in a fridge, long
Yeah,
time.
if it's like a dedicated refrigerator, you know, if it's like your house refrigerator and your kids are going in and out of it and stuff all day, maybe safer to say 7 days.
Uh, yeah, I was told by Suzanne you had a few weeks, 2, 3 weeks, I think at least. It might even
Okay.
be longer. I remember it was in the weeks, not the days. Have you
I
guys
just
used a Xerothol specifically in flour? I have not. I think it's a great product. I think of it more as a sanitation than as a foliar onto plants. I try not to spray anything during flower.
I know people that will use it for PM late in the game because you know it's not going to, you know, it's not going to leave any residue. There's no biology or chemical residue. It's going to lose its peroxicity. It's just going to, you know, it just turns into water and air. You know, but you don't want to get buds wet. But if you've got PM, some people will spray it. I don't do that personally. If you do that, spray one leaf and one bud and see what happens because you're definitely going to get some pistil damage.
Yeah.
And
Stay away
do
from
it
cover
early.
clover.
Do it early so that it can dry out before the lights go back out again. Because if you do it
Right on.
late, they'll definitely mold.
Yeah, this is great advice from Little Nugs, so I just have to throw it up there. If you are going to run a cover crop indoors, clover is not the best one. It is a nice, lovely thrips habitat, and you will never get rid of thrips.
Yeah,
Um, all right, let's see here. You guys have a lot of questions. Are you okay going a little long, Brandon?
sure. I like these.
Okay. If you get PM, should you throw away your soil? No. And will bud washing with hydrogen peroxide, lemon juice, and baking soda kill it and stop spreading as long as your dry room is dialed up? Um, Possibly. But one of the things to understand about PM is it grows on um, living tissue. So it's probably not going to continue to grow once you kill your plant. And one of the interesting things, okay, and let's throw out it's not systemic. So let's take that off the table so folks are aware. Interestingly enough, it doesn't contain mycotoxins, according to Dr. Nicole Gauthier, which I didn't know, but makes a ton of sense when you think about it because a lot of people have smoked PM weed. In fact, I remember going to this house one time, and this was back when I was first getting into cannabis, and this friend of my brother's was so proud of her weed. She's like, it's super frosty. The stuff was like literally like PM was falling off of the leaves. It was so covered in PM. It was disgusting. And they just thought they had like really frosty trichomes.
The platinum, the
But
platinum
I
plant.
guarantee people have smoked PM spores. Everyone who smoked weed has smoked PM spores. Now, how high of concentrations of those spores are probably going to vary depending on the plant itself and how it was cured and or processed and how much spore pressure you had in your room. But for someone who's allergic to molds, they might be more sensitive, like myself. Um, I'm not suggesting we should all keep our PM weed and it's totally cool to have weed with PM and smoke it. What I am saying is if you have a tiny amount in a space and you cut it out and the rest of it looks clean, the majority of growers I know will still save that weed. Bud washing may help remove some of that, but because it grows on living tissue, it's not going to continue to grow once you've cut down the plant and there's no longer water moving through the xylem. Go ahead, Brandon. I tell you want to add something.
One, you could hash it. You could make bubble hash or something if you're worried about it. Two, I have seen lots of folks do peroxide, lemon juice, baking soda, do all these types of washes and stuff. And all I can say about it is there used to be this great meme, and it was basically your weed before this and your weed after the wash. And the picture before was Taylor Swift, and the picture after was Dog the Bounty Hunter. And so I've seen a lot of hideous looking weed that just looked like garbage because people gave it a rinse in peroxide or lemon juice or something else. So I would, instead of that, because for me, in my thought process, one, you're ruining how your weed looks. Two, um, you've just got yourself a step further back from getting it dry, because that's what you need to do to stop it from growing. Is you need to get, you need to get that bud dry as fast as possible. So I wouldn't recommend washing it. I know people that do it. I know people that wash every round where they have a
Some
problem.
people swear by it. You know, you wash your vegetables, they say you should wash your weed. I do think it makes drying it specifically harder. And I think it opens you up to more of those humidity swings in the bud, which could lead to a little bit more botrytis growth possibly. So that is a something to think about.
I would
Yeah.
get in I would get in with your plants and defoliate. Like, I'm not a swazzer, um, but that's a situation where, especially later in flower, go ahead and start swazzing that room. Get rid of every leaf. Turn the dehu, to 11. Get it fired up as hot. Get that room as dry as it can. You don't really care about transpiration rate late in the round. Dry downs are good controlled stress. I would just get the room dry and get as much leaf out of there as possible. Make sure you've got good airflow touching everything. If there's leaves touching, if your humidity's set at 55% and these two leaves are touching, it's 100% right here. And so,
There,
you've got to make sure that your leaves are not touching, or if they are, that they blow open so that, if they come back together, that's one thing. But if they're not separating and don't have a chance to dry out, you'll definitely get PM.
there is some PM that there's at least two species from what I learned from Nicole Gauthier that can infect cannabis, and one of them can survive and thrive under 40% humidity. So keep that in mind. Just lower humidity is not a sure all that you're going to completely stop the life cycle of PM, which we used to think was the case. Um, Make sure, now that I think about it, make sure you actually are talking about PM, like powdery mildew, not botrytis, because what we're saying now does not apply to botrytis. If I see botrytis on a bud, you're absolutely throwing that away. So keep that in mind. Okay, I'm going to speed up through these. SF nematodes, I mean, any beneficial can die in the male. That being said, I think they're one of the hardier insect beneficials compared to the mites, some of the mites and things. Um, you can
They've
get it
been
from
doing
us.
this one for a long time. This is one of the
We
good.
sell them, and there's ways to check viability too. Yeah, and there's videos on that on YouTube if you want to dive into it. Um, or if you
I
have
always,
questions about
I
that, we can do
always
it.
scope mine when they come, and I've never had, and I order nematodes fairly regularly, and I've never had an issue with them. They're always moving.
Yeah. Uh, Yeah, bone meal, gypsum, Dr. Earth. I don't know what that's going to do to your pH. You should test it, depending on what's in those fertilizers. What I can tell you is gypsum's not going to really impact the pH because the calcium and the sulfur kind of like cross cancel pH wise.
Yeah,
That's one of the nice things about it.
do a slurry and check your pH.
So hillbilly herb or herb, depending on how you pronounce it. He buys the Nemesis product. I believe this is from BioBee specifically. It's a slow release nematode product. Um, it's a really interesting one. It's a little more expensive, but it's pretty cool because you can just like sprinkle them on. They look like little
Little
oh,
pearl.
boba tea pearls. Yeah, kind of thing. Um, so yeah. All right, let me fly. I'm catching up here. I'm gonna skip over a bunch and just see if there's any last couple questions. And then we'll get going. Sprouted CTs. I don't know if you want to answer that really quickly. Maybe we save that one for next one. Um, Washing, we kind of already covered a little bit. I haven't seen any research on bud washing one way or another.
Every
Uh,
time I've seen it, it looked horrible. But that's maybe a dozen times. But it's always looked rough.
yeah, discount for a nutrient pack. I mean, we're going to do something for Black Friday again this year. If you want to get a bulk amount, we'll absolutely cut you a discount. Let me know. We work with folks. I probably shouldn't say this on the live, but like we do try to offer, we don't have discount codes that are live right now, but I always try to work with growers to make our products as affordable as possible for people. We hook people up if they're struggling. And yeah, so you can always reach out. Worst that happens is I say no, but I always say it never hurts to ask. Um, Noah's asking specifically about the beneficials for thrips. I don't have them memorized off the top of my head. I see a list from Little Nugs here, but I
Aureus and
would,
Tversky are my go-tos. Cucumbers are good too.
yeah, and then the SF nematodes depending on the species. So,
Yep.
um, yeah, I will say I want to throw this comment up here because I do agree with Jeff. I haven't seen any research showing elevated CO2 to be a problem. Um, Obviously, decreasing CO2 is definitely more concerning. What Brandon was talking about, though, is the only thing that we've been able to possibly tie some of these weird symptoms, we'll call, in some of these larger facilities, and they went away once we started doing nighttime ventilations. Um, so yes, this is a very accurate statement. So that's where I want to separate out what we've seen on the research side from what we're sharing anecdotally that may eventually become researched, or we may find we were full of shit too. So um, yeah, as of today, we believe that some of that new growth that we're seeing is due to elevated CO2 levels. But yeah, I do want to share Jeff's comment because in the effort of being accurate, I think that that's a really important thing to do. So thank you, Jeff. And if you ever hear something on here that you guys question, call us out. That's one thing I know. I got into it recently with Jeremy at Build a Soil, and I had hoped to have a podcast or a discussion on some of these topics, which he wasn't open to doing. If I ever say anything, I want to be able to support why I say it and have a conversation around it, and not necessarily defend it, but share my reasoning and my research and what I've learned. And if I am wrong, it's an opportunity for me to learn. And that was one of the things someone said, like, Brandon told me something a few years ago, and then he changed his mind, like, fuck KiS, because it changed. And it was a comment on a YouTube. And I thought to myself, this exactly shows why people don't understand how science works. Because what Brandon shared 3 years ago might have been the best of our knowledge at the time. And now science has changed. We've learned more. We're open-minded to learning more. And then over time, we're going to get better advice. And so, yeah, we change our agronomic targets on things as we learn more, as things evolve, as research
Root
comes out.
balls. We 4 or
So,
5 years ago, we were telling everybody to leave their root balls in place. I had somebody get offended because I changed, how I would deal with something, and it was like a 3 year, 4 year gap, and I was like, well, do you want me to give you the most accurate, up to date stuff, or do you want me to just hide that from you because my ego's tied up with it somehow? I think it'd be way cooler if you just got the information. That's in the pursuit of science and moving things forward.
yeah, I think that's fair.
And I'm very,
Uh,
very fallible. We all are, So I'm not.
yeah.
There's very
All
few
right.
hills I'm going to die on.
Last two comments. I love this. Thank you, Silas. Said yes. You've obviously tuned into other of our live streams. We're not huge fans of guanos. They do give you available pee, but they're again not that sustainable. But people ask about them all the time.
Years
So
ago, I loved
yes,
them.
yeah. I could make a case for when I might consider using them, but overall, if you're not in a tropical environment and you can afford to use other amendments, I think that's the way to go. Um, Last one from Triple Cannabis Cowboy. Yes, shipping is the big issue for us. We're working on maybe some strategic partnerships to alleviate this, but it's a big challenge. A lot of what we sell is heavier, and so it's or larger in volume, and so it's just hard. It's hard to ship, and shipping keeps getting more and more expensive. Prices don't seem to be coming down on anything. So we are working on better distribution. And I can't discount shipping per se, but we can sometimes discount the product to offset some of that shipping, particularly when we're talking about bulk orders on a scale. Or if you're getting a bunch of amendments that have free shipping off our website, if we're able to take those and put them into the same box and save a little bit on shipping, we'll happily kick you that difference back. So you can always send us an email with a sample order and we'll come back to you with what the shipping actually costs. Um, so yeah, I just want to let you know, we'll work with you on that as the best we can. But we set up our website as if everything's shipping in a separate box with free shipping, just to simplify things. Because a lot of what we send out is in like priority flat rate mail because things are heavy and we know how much we can fit in every given box. So yeah, let us know. But we are working on distribution. We're also working on continually formulating. We're looking right now to formulate stuff for the East Coast so that we could have a mix that we could ship from an East Coast location that would save a ton of shipping for folks over there and maybe help allow us to get into some stores and spaces on that side. So it is a priority. We're working on it, and I appreciate you guys for the support, even if it's just tuning in here.
Hey, and I'm thinking about Jeff's last comment. And if you would just suck all the oxygen out of the truck instead of putting CO2 in, if the CO2 didn't delay senescence, right? We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it later. But yeah, just thinking.
I'm sorry. I was reading all the comments when you said that. I kind of spaced out. I can't multitask.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
I was trying to process the questions. I was looking at this question actually, thinking about it when you asked your question about CO2.
And
So
it's this question right here. It's not all ferments, but just ferments in general tend to have high sodium levels. And so you just want to test a ferment just so that you don't accidentally add too much sodium to a bed. So I'm not saying, neither of us are saying all ferments have, but in general, you do want to test them. Ferments as a foliar, um, that's not going to raise sodium in your, unless you're doing a sprint where you're trying to actually get it into the soil. I don't think you're going to accumulate a bunch of sodium that way. Um, think about
yeah,
what
and there's
the ferment is. A lot of ferments, the action is in the root zone. So um, think about that as well.
I I just try. My big goal is how can I grow the best quality plant possible using the minimal amount of inputs, the limited number of touches, and the cheapest way I can. How can I make this as affordable as possible? Yes, you can absolutely grow a plant using some of these other methods that have you using 10 different products. And some of them may help, and some of them may not do anything other than hurt your pocketbook. But um, I've seen some really healthy plants on social media that way. I would caution folks that just because you see something on social media does not tell you the whole story, um, including the stuff that I post. I would say that goes for all social media. Look at it with a grain of salt, and then yeah, just think about how you want to grow and what's going to make you feel happy. Like some people really like doing stuff when they go into their room. I am not one of those people. I like to look at my plants. I like to look at my plants. That's about where I stop. Like if I have to defoliate, I will. If I have to water or, apply something, I will. But for the most part, when I go in my room, I want to be like, okay, everything's smooth. I can get back to all the other shit I have to do in life. So some people are like, oh, I want to tinker. I want to add this potion or add this product. And so if that's the way you want to grow, I think that's perfectly fine too. But as long as you're paying attention to your plants, no matter how you approach it, it's a win. That's the most important variable of all.
If you can afford it and it's fun, you're doing the right SOP.
There you go. All right, thanks guys. That was a fun week. I really appreciate it. We went super long and really enjoyed all the questions. We'll tackle any extra ones next week and